Okay, folks, I'm just sitting here watching Meet the Press on November 1st, 2020, the Sunday before the election on Tuesday. And I'm 30 minutes in, more than halfway done, and they've done nothing but talk about the latest NBC poll and no analysis of anything else. It's just the poll, and they accept it as gospel, as if it's God's given truth. And they haven't made one word about maybe why we should be skeptical or why we should be concerned about this poll or anything like that. It's just the poll. And I'm just like, it's driving me nuts. And it's one thing I've been wanting to say and make a point about is that head-to-head polling, Trump versus Biden polling, head-to-head polling is only one data point. And that's the only one that anybody on the left and only Democrats are focused on, only head-to-head polling. That's one piece of data. And there's no skepticism of it. There's no discussions of anything else but just polling, head-to-head polling. That's all that we care about, and that's the gospel truth. And it's like, this is insane. And so I went through and I made a list of 28 other factors. There are 28 other pieces of data, hard data, scientific data, factors, whatever you want to call them, that point to a Trump victory. And so you've got one piece of data, which is head-to-head Trump v. Biden polling, which shows a Biden victory. And you've got 28 other pieces of data, facts, factors, whatever you want to call them, that point to a Trump victory. But we're all supposed to think it's going to be this Biden landslide, a huge Biden landslide, because we got head-to-head polling that shows a Biden victory. So let's go through. There's 28. You've got 1 versus 28. So here's some other factors that it would be smart to look at if you're going to try to predict the 2020 election. Sure, you can look at head-to-head polling. You can look to head-to-head polling. There's no problem with that. My point is, you need to look at other stuff too. You need to look into all of these factors. So let's go through them. Crowd size and rally size. Huge difference. Trump's pulling in 20, 30, 40,000 people into rallies. He's got crowds all across the country, even in places like California and New York. Massive rallies, even way outpacing 2016. Trump's rallies and crowds are way bigger than 2016, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. Compare that to Joe Biden's pathetic rally crowd size. And don't give me this excuse, oh, well, Biden doesn't want to have a rally because of Corona. No, that's BS. He'd be having rallies just as well as Trump is if he could. And in fact, Biden has tried to do so. You've seen Biden try to do rallies. Nobody shows up. And so there's one hard data, an actual fact, a fact. Crowd size and rally size points to a Trump victory. Number 2, the enthusiasm gap. This is an important piece of data that people have looked at for a long time, for many elections. Nobody mentions it anymore. Haven't heard a word, not a single word about the enthusiasm gap in mainstream media for months now. But you know the enthusiasm gap is massive. Trump voters are more enthusiastic than they've ever been in their entire lives. Massive enthusiasm. On the other side, you've got Joe Biden, a DNC corrupt career politician, Washington, D.C. insider, the worst of the worst in terms of everything that we hate about politicians. No enthusiasm. Biden was the most boring of all 2020 Democrats. So a massive enthusiasm gap. And you can look at that, whether you want to look at that with actual polling in terms of enthusiasm or anecdotal data or look at crowd sizes, but the enthusiasm gap is massive. Let's look at approval ratings amongst blacks and Latinos. Trump has had lots of shock polls that show, for example, in Florida, Trump had over 50% approval amongst Latinos. There's been lots of polls that have shown Trump with 30, even 40, 45% approval amongst blacks. Remember, the Democrats need to get 90, 95%, 98% of blacks to win. And they need 60, 70, 80% of Latinos to win. But there's been lots of different polls that show shockingly high numbers of approval for Trump amongst blacks and Latinos. Another piece of actual scientific data suggests a Trump victory. Presidential travel. This is also a really important fact. And in fact, this is what made me think of creating this list, was when Meet the Press was showing, here's the campaign stops for Joe Biden. And guess what? Joe Biden's going to Minnesota. Joe Biden's defending the blue wall in PA, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Joe Biden's not going to North Carolina. Joe Biden's not going to Texas. Joe Biden's not going to Arizona. And then you look at where is Trump going? Trump is going to, he's been to New Hampshire. He's been to Pennsylvania a whole bunch. He's been to Nevada. He's been to Arizona. You look at the actual presidential travel, and Biden having to go to Minnesota is a disaster for the Democrats. Joe Biden should never have to go to Minnesota. Joe Biden is playing defense in what's supposed to be a deep, deep blue state. So there you go. Presidential travel, the fourth factor. The fourth factor pointing to a Trump victory. Approval ratings on the economy and polling on who is going to do better on the economy. Trump has a clear advantage on that over Biden. Trump is getting, I think, 55, 56, 60% of people say that Trump is a good job on the economy and will do a better job than Biden. We all know that the economy is typically the number one most important issue in the elections, and Trump has a great approval rating on the economy. And so economic approval ratings and how the American people feel about each candidate on the economy, a huge factor pointing to a Trump victory. The lockdown issue, coronavirus lockdowns. Donald Trump has staked out a position of being very pro reopening. Donald Trump is constantly saying, reopen the country, reopen the country. You've got Democrat governors in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan who have got their states locked down hard. You've got places like New York and California with severe draconian lockdowns, and they're incredibly unpopular. People hate lockdowns. These lockdowns are one of the most politically unpopular things ever. When Trump wins, one of the main reasons is going to be because Trump is not in favor of lockdowns. They're such a violation of freedom. I think they're unconstitutional. Lockdowns are terrible. And if you actually look that the Democrats have staked out a pro-lockdown position where the Democrats are saying, vote for the Democrats, we're gonna have a dark winter with lockdowns and mask mandates and higher taxes, and it's just this very, very doom and gloom lockdown, house arrest, put you under house arrest. Come, we're going to break up your Thanksgiving dinner. Don't you dare have a family over for Thanksgiving or Christmas. We'll have the police show up and arrest you for having a Thanksgiving dinner with your family. It's insane. So the lockdown issue and how popular lockdowns are and the positions of the candidates, another factor pointing to a Trump victory. Social desirability bias. This is a huge one. This is why the polls were so wrong in 2016. Remember, the polls in 2016 at the state level, well, at the national level, they were showing a huge Hillary Clinton victory, which was wrong. And then even at the state level, they were wrong. They were showing Hillary Clinton leading in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by anywhere from +6 to +12. The polls were completely wrong in 2016 because of the social desirability bias. And that's only gotten worse. That is basically people lying to pollsters because they don't want to admit that they're voting for Trump. And the reason they don't want to admit they're voting for Trump is because the left is incredibly hateful and intolerant and closed-minded. And people have lost their jobs. People have been physically attacked. People have been had their lives destroyed. People have had all kinds of terrible, horrible things happen to them simply because they support Trump. Simply because they support Trump. The left is violent. The left is incredibly hateful. And they'll call you a racist. They'll call you a bigot. They'll call you all these nasty, nasty names. Which, of course, let's remember, guys, the United States can't be a racist country if the worst thing you can get called in this country is a racist. But the fact that leftists will call you a racist simply because you support Trump is why people are not telling pollsters they're going to vote Trump. That's called the social desirability bias. It's a massive data point backed up by the actual results of 2016 and other studies subsequent to that time. So the social desirability bias, another factor showing a Trump victory. Early voting returns. here it is, the Sunday before the election, and we've already had 70 million, 60 million people, whatever it is, have already voted. We have actual data from the voting from certain states, particularly about which parties have returned ballots. And the early voting returns show Trump doing wonderfully. For example, Republicans are ahead by 9 percentage points last I checked in Miami-Dade County in Florida in terms of returning ballots by party. So again, actual data points showing early voting returns, pointing to a Trump victory. Another factor in data point to show a Trump victory. Voter registration numbers. You can break up the voter registrations amongst each state by party. Places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, the Republicans have registered more new voters since 2016 in those states than the Democrats. You've got people like Scott Pressler out there registering new voters constantly. You actually look at the data state by state about which party has registered more voters, and it's the Republicans are ahead. So a hard fact, hard data point. New voter registrations by party, by state, showing a Trump victory. Rioting and looting issues. Look at what's happened over the last 6 months with rioting and looting. Joe Biden and the Democrats refused to condemn rioting and looting in Antifa for months and months and months, and it's not popular. The American people do not like rioting and looting. Joe Biden finally eventually had to come out and say, I don't support Antifa and rioting and looting, and by then it was too late and nobody believed him. Kamala Harris was literally bailing out criminals because she was so in favor of the rioting and looting. And so look at what's gone on with the rioting and looting. That's reality. That's stuff that's really happened. That's not good for Democrats. It's all Democrats that are doing the rioting and looting. That's tied into the next issue. Gun sales. Gun sales are off the charts. We've had record gun sales. And you know what? Gun owners vote Republican by a huge majority. A huge majority of gun owners vote Republican. In fact, if you're a gun owner, you can basically assume that you're a Republican voter. Gun owners vote Republican. That's just the data. Look it up. If you own a gun, you vote Republican. That's hard. And there are millions and millions of new gun owners now. Millions of new gun owners. Again, hard data, actual facts. Millions of new gun owners in the United States just in the last year or two. And those people are going to vote Republican. Another hard data fact pointing to a Trump victory. Next one, Trafalgar Polls. Trafalgar was the only polling group in 2016 to get it right at a state level. Trafalgar was the only one to ever show Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania even close, let alone Trump winning in 2016. And Trafalgar is the reason that Trafalgar can do that is because he accounts for problems in methodology in polling. And a bunch of them, but particularly the social desirability bias. And guess what? In 2020, you've got Trafalgar showing Trump with victories in these states. Robert Cahaley, the leader of Trafalgar, he's actually said he thinks Trump is going to outperform even Trafalgar polls by a point or two. He says, yeah, I'm doing things to take into account Trafalgar, or I'm trying to take into account social desirability bias, but even I can't get all of it out of there. So Robert Cahaley thinks Trump is going to outperform Trafalgar even by a point or two. And Trafalgar is showing Trump up by a point or two in some of these swing states. So Trafalgar polls, they were right in 2016, and they're likely to be right in 2020. Another fact pointing towards a Donald Trump victory. Look at trust in the mainstream media at an all-time low. Even lower than in 2016. And the only anti-Trump stuff out there is literally mainstream media stuff. And guess what? No Americans believe the media anymore. Trust in the mainstream media as an all-time low. It's cratered out. More people would rather watch somebody on Twitch or YouTube than they would mainstream media. Trust in the media is cratered. Nobody trusts the media. And it's the media who's been telling us that Trump is bad, orange man bad, but nobody trusts the media anymore. And that's bared out by the facts and the data. Another factor pointing to a Trump victory. Another piece of polling data is the better off, worse off vote poll. 56% of Americans said they're better off now than they were 4 years ago. That's a huge indicator that Trump is going to do good in this election. Typically, if you've got more than 50% of the Americans saying they're better off now than they were 4 years ago, those are re-elect numbers. So another piece of hard scientific data pointing to a Trump victory. Better off, worse off polling data. Look at paper endorsements. You know, maybe this isn't the, you know, the biggest indicator, but it is another indicator. Which paper, for example, the Pittsburgh paper just recently endorsed Trump for the first time, I think, ever, or in 50 years or something crazy. And there's been a bunch of other ones. I mean, I think Boston paper, Pittsburgh paper, papers that have never endorsed a Republican for president are endorsing Trump. And again, nothing scientific about this, but it is a fact. And it is a something to grab onto and say, wait, whoa, why are all these papers endorsing Trump? Maybe that points to a Trump victory. Look at yard sign numbers. How many yard signs do you see? There's actually studies out there that actually show the number of yard signs actually do predict victories and losses by politicians. And Trump yard sign tallies are way higher than Biden. There's way more yard signs and flags for Trump than there are for Biden. Another factor pointing to a Trump victory. Police organization endorsements, union endorsements. Again, police unions have always endorsed Democrats. Now the police unions are endorsing Trump. Obviously, that's because Joe Biden is wanting to transfer funding away from the police departments, and he's not standing up for law enforcement. Think that's politically popular? Think that's a real genius idea here? Here's a genius political move. Let's hate on law enforcement and try to take money from law enforcement. Okay, now you got a bunch of police unions and police organizations endorsing Trump. Again, nothing scientific about that, but it's a fact. That's what happened. There's all kinds of law enforcement organizations that have endorsed Trump and not Biden. Another thing pointing to a Trump victory. Another actual election results that show a Trump victory. Look at Bernie Sanders results. Bernie Sanders could get no more than 20% to 30% of the Democrat primary electorate to vote for him. You know what that equals? 10% to 15% of Americans. So you've got 10% to 15% of Americans who are supporting socialism, communism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it, Bernie Sanders style policies. 10 to 15% of Americans support that crap. And now you've got Joe Biden embracing policies that got 10% to 15% of the vote in the 2020 Democrat primary. Or I'm sorry, 20 to 30% there, only 10 to 50% of the American electorate. Joe Biden's gone all in. Joe Biden believes in all that crap, whether it's the Green New Deal or Medicare for all or raising taxes on working Americans to pay for healthcare for illegal aliens, open borders, extreme stuff, socialism stuff. Joe Biden's taking those policies, and you look at the last actual election results we have. Bernie Sanders got destroyed. Bernie Sanders was destroyed. Another actual fact, Kamala Harris, look at how bad she did in the Democrat primary. She was so unpopular. Kamala Harris was so unpopular, she had to drop out before there was even voting. Kamala Harris was so bad that she dropped out in the primary before even voting started. And then now she's the vice presidential candidate and she's out there and she's supposed to be pop. She is so unlikable. She's mean-spirited. She's cold. She's insincere, disingenuous. I mean, super horrible. Kamala Harris is not a likable person whatsoever. You know, and a far leftist too, a leftist lunatic. And that's who Joe Biden picked her for all the wrong reasons. Everybody knows why Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris. And it wasn't for the right reasons. And that's another fact, is how bad Kamala Harris did in the Democrat primary. These are facts that point to a Trump victory. These are not just my opinions. Kamala Harris got destroyed in the Democrat primary. Kamala Harris was not popular even among Democrats. This is not just some thing I'm pulling out. This is a fact. This is what happened. This is history. That points to a Trump victory. Joe Biden has one of the least impressive, least popular vice presidential candidates of all time. Look at what Joe Biden has flip-flopped on the fracking ban and the Green New Deal and fossil fuel bans. Incredibly unpopular positions. And again, this has been a big issue in the campaign. And this is a fact. Joe Biden said he wanted to ban fracking. Thank you, old school warrior. Thank you so much. Biden said he wanted to ban fracking, and now he's trying to back away from it. And Donald Trump is out there at every rally in Pennsylvania playing the clips of Joe Biden saying he wants to ban fracking. That's not a good sign for Joe Biden. Those are not popular policies. Another fact pointing to a Trump victory. Look at the 2016 presidential results and how wrong the polls were. A thing that's actually happened, a thing that really happened, was in 2016, the polls showed with Hillary Clinton was supposed to have a 90% chance of win or whatever it was. And Hillary Clinton was supposed to be up by 6 in the blue wall states, or up by 10, or even up by 12. I mean, some of the polls in the blue wall states in 2016 was Hillary Clinton plus 12, up by 12. And guess what? She lost those states. So the 2016 results, nobody takes any of that into account anywhere. A huge one, the incumbency advantage. When was the last time you heard about the incumbency advantage? Nobody's heard about it. Nobody said a word about the incumbent's advantage. That's one of the biggest factors in presidential elections. Everybody knows the incumbent president has a huge advantage. Not one word about it. Never mentioned. It's Meet the Press the Sunday before the election. Not a single mention of Donald Trump's incumbency advantage. Not one word about the Donald Trump incumbent. It's a huge factor. Donald Trump has the incumbency advantage. That points to a Donald Trump victory. Cable TV viewership. Tucker Carlson is number 1. Fox News is number 1. Again, these are real numbers, real data. Tucker Carlson and Fox News are dominating in the cable TV viewership. Again, it's just one factor. It's one piece of data. It's doesn't answer the question who's going to win, but it's something to consider. It's something to consider. October surprises. The Hunter Biden laptop in particular. All of the October surprises have been going against Joe Biden. Everybody knows that the October surprise is a big deal, and the October surprise has a huge impact. I don't necessarily think the Hunter Biden laptop is going to have a huge impact. I think most people already knew that Joe Biden was corrupt, or nothing would convince them otherwise. But again, it's one thing. Look, which way did the October surprises go? The October surprises went against Joe Biden. It's just one more piece of thing to think about how Trump might win. Tax policies. Joe Biden is out there purposefully saying he's going to raise taxes. It's insane. When was the last? Let's answer this. When was the last time a presidential candidate won promising to raise taxes? I guess maybe Barack Obama. Before that, it's never happened, I don't think. Raising taxes is not smart politically. And yet Biden's out there promising to raise taxes. It's not a good sign for Biden's chances. Here's another thing that nobody ever brings up is the difficulties in the polling methodology. This is something that Robert Cahaley at Trafalgar Group talks about. He constantly talks about how, look, polling is very difficult. Polling is a very hard thing to do. It's very difficult to get somebody on the phone. It's very difficult to get that person to talk to you for like 40 minutes. Some of these pollsters are asking people to answer the phone and then talk to them for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Most people aren't going to do that. And especially Trump voters aren't going to do that for whatever reason. But never a word about it. Never a word from anybody about how hard polling is and the difficulties in it and how it can be really wrong, and that these aren't, 100% absolutely, to live and die by. The pollsters will tell you be very cautious, be very careful with these. But then they give the numbers to the media, and the media is like, this is as good as gold. This is 100% right. There's no way this is wrong. This is the poll. Okay. Margin of error. Last one. Margin of error. Margin of errors. These polls have margins of error. They're never mentioned. Sometimes the media will mention the margin of error if Donald Trump is winning, but they never mention the margin of error when it's showing a Joe Biden victory. they'll maybe put it up in the corner on the bottom of the screen or something, but they'll never mention the margin of error as a real reason to be cautious about the polls. Some of the margin of errors have 4-point margin of errors, and it's not mentioned in a poll. They'll just, and which is probably even within the margin of error, they won't even mention it. Here's the thing. Think of all these different things that we just went through. 28 different things, 28 different pieces of actual fact, actual data, actual history, 28 different reasons to what you can use to look to who might win the election, or at least reasons to be cautious about the head-to-head polls. There's all that, or there's head-to-head polls. And the Democrats and the media are ignoring everything. They're ignoring everything else except head-to-head polls. It's insane. I mean, I've literally just watched 30 minutes of Meet the Press. And you know, I've been reading news and watching news every day for years and years and years. Like, I'm just using Meet the Press as an example because I just watched 30 minutes of it. But this is all Democrats are doing the same thing on Twitter. Democrats are doing the same thing on everything. Democrats have been doing the same thing in the media for months and months and months and months on every different media thing. This is not just, you know, Meet the Press, but it's like, you're going to focus on one thing, head-to-head polls. And you're not going to think about any other facts or any other data. You're not even going to bring up any one of these things, any one of these 28 things. Why? To be skeptical of the polls. You're not even going to bring up one of these things about reasons why you might be cautious or skeptical of the polls. Nope. It's just, what do the head-to-head polls show? What do the head-to-head polls show? Oh, that's what's going to happen. Yo, wow. And we're going to sit here and talk for 30 minutes about the election and not once bring up any other piece of fact or data that might show something different or that might be reasons to be cautious about the results. Nope. Just head-to-head polls. There you go. 28 reasons why Trump will win the 2020 election.